To explain the astrology of health, let's divide our discussion into three sections. First of all, let's talk about the symbolisms of the planets as they pertain to health. And then, in the second part, let's discuss how you use astrology to diagnose the strong and the weak points in the health. And finally, in the third part, let's discuss how you can use astrology to proactively stay strong and healthy. And we'll describe how to use the main chart to do that, but also the important role that one of the subdivisions called the uneven fifths, or Trimshamsa, plays in this process. If you've never heard of this uneven fifths division before, I recently released a video all about it, how you calculate it, etc., how you read it. I'll put a link to it in the description. And also, if you're interested in getting your Trimshamsa, your uneven fifths, I have a report that will tell you that and help you explore it, which is on my site, and I'll tell you more about that in this video as well at the end. So those are all the things we're going to cover in this video. Let's get into it. Every planet has something to do with both our internal and external types of health. But there are basically 4 planets who primarily deal with the external health and 3 that primarily deal with the internal health or the mental health. Let's start with the 4 planets that have to do with your physical or external health. They specifically involve how you eat and derive nutrition and energy from your food. So those 4 are the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The Sun signifies the core of things. Mars signifies the force or the power in things. Jupiter is the increase of things, and Saturn is the decrease. Those are the basic planetary symbolisms. And the way they apply here to the context of physical health, the Sun being the core is like the core of the metabolism process. In other words, how do you generate energy? Mars being the force itself is how you can use the energy that you've generated. Jupiter being the increase is all about how you can improve, store, and reuse, like augment your energy. And Saturn being decrease is not really how you get rid of your energy, but how do you get rid of the waste that using the energy produces. So, therefore, the Sun has to practically do with your stomach, because that's the core that generates the energy. And also the heart, because that's the core that distributes the energy. Mars, on the other hand, has to do with your muscle, how you use your energy. But also, in a subtle sense, it has to do with your vitality and enthusiasm in general, kind of like your passion. Jupiter being about how you can reuse and augment your energy has to do with the storage of energy, in other words, fat, and also has to do with the secondary digestive processes, like the things that happen in the liver and pancreas and so on, and the chemicals and biological structures that are involved in that, like insulin and so on. And also because Jupiter is about augmenting your energy, it's about the whole reproductive process in general. Saturn being about the reduction of the waste is literally then about the evacuation system, how the body gets rid of dirt, how the body cleans itself. The remaining 3 planets are Venus, Mercury, and the Moon. These guys primarily symbolize things that affect your internal or non-physical health. You'll see what I mean when I describe the symbols. So Venus signifies the senses, Mercury the nerves, and Moon the mind. So they form like a path, just like the physical planets had the kind of path, the Sun generating energy, Mars using it, Jupiter storing it, Saturn getting rid of the waste. There's also a path here. The path here is that the stuff starts with Venus, the senses, and then that data of the sense experience is passed to Mercury, which is the nerves and the nervous system, and it communicates and interprets the information and passes it to the mind, the Moon, which then has a reaction, emotional reaction to it, which produces a desire and impetus for action, which then bounces or rebounds back through Mercury to use the nervous system to tell Venus what to do with the senses next. So Venus signifies our connection to objects, our connection to things that are outside of us. Mercury signifies the transmission or the exchange that goes on between our inner self and the outer world. And the mind is the kind of structure that experiences that interaction and reacts to it. So the way this affects health, Venus will signify the health of your senses, your eyes, your ears, etc., your tongue, your senses. It will also indicate your ability to achieve meaningful connections with things outside of you, which you might not think is relevant to health, but it's extremely relevant to mental health, and therefore motivation, and therefore physical health. And of course, Venus also has a huge role to play in sexuality and reproduction, because it's about how we connect with things that are separate from us. The way Mercury affects health directly is that it has to do with your coordination. Like hand-eye coordination, etc. How much dexterity do you have? How refined can you be? Are you clumsy? Also has to do with your balance and things like that. Also, because Mercury is all about interaction, it has to do with how well you can communicate, which again might not seem like a health issue, but it is. It's like stuttering problems, speech impairments are mainly recognized through Mercury and things connected with Mercury. Also, Mercury will directly affect your recognition processes. So typical diseases associated with old age, like Parkinson's, senility, dementia, also are typically recognized or diagnosed through Mercury. The way the moon's symbolism affects health in a practical way is, first of all, in your empathy. How relatable you feel, how empathetic you are to the objects that you're experiencing. Again, may not seem like a health issue, but it is a mental health issue, and it has a lot to do with autism or isolation. The moon is also an extremely important symbol when you're trying to diagnose anything relating to memory, and also any kind of ailments that are affecting desire. So the moon is the key focus for example, depression or lack of desire. Now, also the moon has another set of health symbolisms that aren't really related to what you see here. And that's because the moon is also the counterpart to the sun. So it signifies things that are counterparts to the sun's coreness. So it has to do with the blood and the fluids, because the sun signifies the heart. And the moon is what the heart is pumping and moving around the blood. Let's take a look at 3 charts to explain kind of case studies of how you would do simple diagnosis using this symbolism. Here's Helen Keller's chart. The first thing I'd like to draw your attention to is her Venus, because Venus represents the senses, and that's what she's famous for. She's famous for having very, very difficult senses, blind, deaf, etc. Now, how would you notice that? How would you diagnose that using her chart? First of all, to start with, her Venus is at a very low degree. It's at 2 degrees. When planets are within 3 degrees of the border, they become subject to problems more easily. Then the problems that Venus gets subjected to are also very evident. It's quite close to Ketu, right, which causes significant problems and introversion. And then it's also quite close to the sun, which means that it's combust. Now, just like in regular medicine, you have to look for more than one indicator of something before you expect that thing to actually happen. It's the same thing in an astrological diagnosis. So we will find a very similar thing to what we found with the Venus if we looked at her Mercury. Mercury signifies nerves and is very connected with Venus, as we just described. The two of them work together to get sensory information into the brain. And so her Mercury is even worse off than her Venus by a lot, because her Mercury is at 0 degrees of its sign, and that places it not just on the border between 2 signs, but on the border between a water and fire sign, which is called the Gandanta, which is the extremely deep border, or the extremely difficult border. So finding these two things, Venus and Mercury both being on borders, Mercury being very, very exactly on the worst border, and Ketu and the Sun affecting her Venus adversely, you could make a diagnosis, or you could at least begin to make a hypothesis or a hypothetical diagnosis that she has sensual impairments, sensory impairments. Here's another example. This is the chart of the famous singer Meatloaf. And Meatloaf is well known for having weight problems, chronic weight problems, or very serious weight problems. So I would like to draw your attention to his Jupiter, because Jupiter signifies the increase and storage of fat and all kinds of things that affect having too much fat, like insulin, liver, pancreas, and so forth. If you note, his Jupiter is exactly conjoined with his Ketu. Again, you have to look for other things before you have confidence in a diagnosis. So let me draw your attention to his Sun, because his Sun is debilitated. And then let's check out his Mars, because that is also debilitated and is also at a very late degree of a water sign, meaning like Helen Keller's Mercury, it's in what we call the Gandanta. It's in the border between water and fire. So this is a significant puzzle that's come together because these three planets work together, just like in Helen Keller's case. It's Venus working with Mercury to give sensory information to the mind. In Meatloaf's case, it's the way this whole metabolism process works together. The Sun, Mars, and Jupiter that are indicating, or at least showing you that you better investigate the possibility of a significant obesity problem. For the third case, let's look at Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee has a very interesting chart. It looks kind of more or less empty except for this Sun that's right on his ascendant. And if you look carefully at his 12th house, it contains both the 6th, 8th, and 12th lords, which is a very complex, powerful yoga called Viparita Raj Yoga. So with his case, when you look at his basic chart, you can't really see that there's any sort of physical problem with him. And in fact, take a look at him. He's extremely physical fit. He's an athlete. Yet he must have had some kind of a crucial problem because he died suddenly at a young age. So in a case like this, where you don't have a clear diagnosis just from the main chart, this is where you really need to look into the uneven fifths or the trimsha. Even in the other cases like Helen Keller and Meatloaf, you better look into the uneven fifths and other divisions too to become more sure. But in their cases, we had very significant indicators of their particular illnesses. In Bruce Lee's case, we're left really wondering. So let's use Bruce Lee's case as an example of how useful the trimsha can be. If you have no idea what the trimsha, the uneven fifths, is, I just did a video about it. This is the thumbnail for it, and I'll put a link for it in the description below. Also, I have a report on my website that will explain your trim samsa to you, and I'll also tell you more about that at the end of the video. For now, let's just take a look at Bruce Lee's trimsha. The key thing about this is that of the 8 points that we use, 7 of them are in negative dignity. You can see there's a lot of problems, particularly Mars and Mercury have a negative dignity, and even worse than that is Sun and Jupiter have the most negative dignity. So my report would evaluate this trim shamsa as being mostly negative because there's 7 negative planets versus 1 positive. Now, if you probe further and you see the connection of the negative trimsha planets to the main chart, that's where you can really get some gold mined out of the charts. So for Bruce Lee, his Sun is that one planet that's really dominating the chart. And so since the Sun has a very weak situation in trimsha, it means even though the main chart looks strong and healthy, there's that hidden weakness in the dominant planet. Furthermore, the other very difficult planet in trimsha is Jupiter, and that is the lord of his first house. So the problems that you find in the trimsha are very significant to the main chart. Therefore, you expect that although he's a healthy person, there's some sort of significant problem. Now, there's a very practical way to apply the trim samsa information to be proactive about your health. Now, from a Vedic viewpoint or Ayurvedic viewpoint, health is maintained primarily by food. because food is the basic, easily available form of medicine. Most medicines are just derived from extracting and concentrating things that you get from plants. So by looking at your Trimsamsa and seeing the quality of the planets, you can know how healthy the associated foods and flavors are. And if you're eating healthy foods and flavors, then you'll keep your internal balance of things correct and balanced, and you'll feel healthy and energetic, and you'll be resistant to illness. So first, let's break down the 7 flavors and how they apply to the 7 planets. The sun has to do with hot flavors. It's not just that any spicy food is solar. It's specifically that raw spice power that you find in this red chili. The moon's flavor is salty. So the sun is spicy or hot, and the moon is salty. Mercury is the 7th flavor, which we call these days, universally we call it umami, a Japanese word. Umami is a flavor which is very mellow in and of itself. It's a very balanced flavor, just like Mercury, and it supports or enhances. There's like a stage for the rest of the flavors to really be boosted. Venus represents sour flavor, the kind of flavor that puckers your lips. Mars represents the bitter flavor, the very strong and a bit aggressive flavor. Jupiter signifies sweet flavors, the fattiest flavor, and also the flavor that affects your alertness in your brain the most, like your ability to learn and pay attention. Saturn signifies astringent flavor. So be careful that you know the difference between bitter and astringent between Mars and Saturn. An example of bitter is a Goya or bitter melon. An example of astringent is tea. So the key thing is you will know that you have an astringent flavor when it makes your mouth feel dried out. It's a similar flavor to bitter, but it dries the mouth. And that's why it's related with Saturn. So what you do is if you have a weak sun in your trimsha, in your uneven fifths, then you avoid spicy food, and that will help your body stay balanced. If you have a very strong moon, then you don't need to pay attention to all this caution about salty foods. Now, these flavors are ubiquitous. It doesn't really matter what kind of food they come from. It's more about the whole dish, the whole meal combined together. But there are also specific ingredients that are associated with each planet. And these ingredients are derived very simply from the color that's connected with the planet. The idea being that the food shows its quality from its color. So we'll divide the food into 2 types. One is the protein source, and the other is like the vitamin source. So you're going to have legumes or beans as one category, and then like vegetables that are as another category. I'll give you examples of both because you need both. So the sun's color is orangish brown, very brown, like tanned, like a very sun-tanned person. So the grain associated with the sun is wheat. This is one of the most ubiquitous grains. So you have to watch out for this if you have a weak sun, a very weak sun in your trimsha. You have to be very careful about breads. As for vegetables, there's not too many brown vegetables. There's vegetables that have brown skin, plenty of that. And so the skin is something to avoid if you have a weak sun, or to take a lot of if you have a strong sun. But most of the vegetable that we eat is not in the skin, but in the inside. So it's more, you'll find more orange variety of vegetables being associated with the sun, like carrots. The color of the moon is white. So the white grain, rice. Now it's not limited to rice, but rice is like the figurehead. Same thing, the sun's grain is not limited to wheat. It's any brown grain, but it's really particularly wheat. So rice is the lunar grain. If you have a great moon, then you need to eat a lot of rice to be healthy. If you have a weak moon, then you need to avoid rice. If you have a neutral moon, then rice is not really very important in your diet. You can eat it, you cannot eat it. It's not a big deal. White vegetables, things like potatoes, there's actually quite a few white vegetables. They don't have to be white on the outside, but the flesh that you actually eat has to be white. Mercury's color is green. So the protein source for Mercury is the mung dal, or the green bean. Any kind of green bean especially noted in Indian texts, is the mung dal. Peas also work. Any very green bean. And the vegetable, there's plenty of them, right? Spinach is really a standout for Mercury because it has a very umami nature to it. Venus's color is sort of prismatic or pinkish purpley. So it's sort of difficult to get a bean in that color. But there is one, and it's the hyacinth bean. As for vegetables, also there's not a whole lot of pink vegetables, but there are things like beets, which have a purpley pink color to them. Mars's color is red. So you get red lentils, the red beans are associated with Mars, and vegetables like tomato. Jupiter's color is yellowish. So the grain of Jupiter is chickpea, and an example of a Jupiterian vegetable is corn, the typical yellow corn especially, but any kind of corn is usually yellow on the inside. Saturn's color is black. What's a black grain? There's actually a black grain, and it's the black sesame. And if you have a great Saturn in Trimsha, you're going to love black sesame. It's going to make you feel so good and balanced and healthy after you eat it. Any sesame is great actually for Saturn, but particularly the black one. And there's not really that many black vegetables, are there? There's some that are black on the outside, like eggplants. And again, that means you would want to eat the skins mostly, but you don't really do that when eating. But if you're really trying to go about this medicinally, olives are a great option for Saturn. The black olives, of course. Now let me just give you a simple pointer on how to use the information in my report on your Trim Samsa to figure out your ideal diet. The report gives you this ordered list of the planets in terms of how dignified they are in this uneven fifths division. So this is an example of my information. It shows Mercury and Saturn as being very good in the Trimsa and the Sun and Jupiter as being very bad. So what I take away from this is I should eat more of the foods associated with Mercury and Saturn and eat less of the foods associated with the Sun and Jupiter. So for example, eat more umami flavor, eat more astringents, get more mung bean and sesame, have more spinach and black olives. And what I need to avoid and try to decline, try to get away from, make sure I don't overdo on the Sun and Jupiter foods. So that's like hot spice foods or sweet foods, the wheat and the chickpeas and carrots and corn. The funny thing is, this is exactly matching to the foods that I really love and the foods that, it's not that I don't like them, but after eating them, I feel very weighed down and tired. So now this is all the kind of stuff that you can get from your Trimsa chart. Let me explain to you how you can get information on your Trimsa chart from my report that's available on my website. Now the only remaining question is, how do you get this report so that you can get this information for yourself? That's fairly easy. You go to my website, victorcara.com, and you click on the readings link, and then you select what module you want. If you want the basic chart interpreted, get the basic module. And if you want all of your subdivisions, including the Saptamsha interpreted, then you click to include also the subdivisions module. And then you click this to enter your birth data, and then you click this button to order it. Please don't forget to like and comment, and your likes and your comments help YouTube recognize that this video is something that should be shown to new people.